Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My name is Molly McLaughlin, and I own a company that optimizes sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change. Each week, I'll be interviewing world-class experts ranging from doctors, innovators, and thought leaders to give actionable tips and strategies that you can implement to become a more skillful sleeper. Let's jump into your dose of practical sleep training. Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My guest today is Nina Collins, a writer and entrepreneur and founder of the Woolfer, a social platform and website for like-minded women over 40. So a little background on this. The community grew organically out of a closed Facebook group that Nina had started back in 2015 called What Would Virginia Woolf Do? And her book, What Would Virginia Woolf Do? And Other Questions I Ask Myself as I Attempt to Age Without Apology, as it's called, was published in April 2018. She's a graduate of Barnard College, has a master's degree from Columbia in the field of narrative medicine, and has a long professional background in book publishing, both as a literary scout and then as an agent. She has 4 nearly grown children and lives in Brooklyn. So a couple things. One, we had actually recorded this last year, and so it had kind of been sitting in the vault, and I've been eagerly awaiting to bring this out because there's been so many clients that I have had that have been somewhere in the process of navigating menopause, whether I've been working with them either during that period or post-menopause, but either way, that kind of chapter in their life has been a big part of certainly the conversation around sleep, to say the least, and that Nina Collins had made such a profound impact on their experience navigating that and providing kind of a platform and forum for women to, discuss and air out all of the things that they're going through in kind of a safe and often funny and witty and smart kind of group. So I've been very excited to share this conversation, and I hope you guys get a lot of benefit out of just hearing her authenticity, her vulnerability, and just really what she's created. The Facebook group alone wound up in the New York Times, just for how noteworthy and how active and how much women were craving this sort of place to share, really what they're going through at whatever stage of the game that they're in. And again, for any woman over the age of 40. And as we know, going through this period of life can often bring about big changes in our sleep patterns. So one of the things naturally that we're going to focus in on this conversation is what to do about that. What are some of the options? What does it look like? What do people go through? What type of people are affected by this? Or, what type of women are affected by this as they go through that? Is it all women? Have they been good sleepers before? Were they bad sleepers before? Were they, all those labels? How do we take things throughout that area of our life that's, inevitable for most of us to then find kind of that light at the end of the tunnel when sometimes it can feel really challenging. So she's going to bring a lot of insight into this topic, and I think you will really enjoy this conversation. Now, before we get into the podcast, I do want to take a quick minute to give a shout out to our sponsor, BetterHelp, or as I like to call it, a therapist in your pocket. It's the exact app that I used when I was going through my really challenging period of insomnia while traveling overseas. And the ability to maintain a consistent therapist in real life was just really not an option for me since we were jumping around from country to country. So the ability to, with using my phone, have video calls weekly with my therapist. I was paired with I connected with a great therapist right off the bat, but I do know other people who have been able to kind of shop around with some of the therapists on that app until they find a great fit for them. And in between those calls, one of the things that I found was really helpful is that you can also send voice notes, text messages, images in between that, longer weekly video call so that you do have this really very real ongoing connection and support that I certainly, at least in my experience, hadn't felt with real life therapists that I had used in the past. And also the pricing structure is much more competitive than a lot of the real life therapists that you can come into contact with. So I found it to be a lot of benefits. I recommend it to a lot of people that are just kind of going through struggles in their life or just simply want to be able to up level and bring in that level of reflection and awareness into their life about what's both working and not working. And you can certainly cancel at any time. And for our sleepy community, the BetterHelp company has hooked us up with 10% off if you go to betterhelp.com/sleep is a skill. Again, betterhelp.com/sleep is a skill. All right. And welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My guest is Nina Collins today, and I cannot be more excited to dive in to all that this amazing woman has created. Podcast episode towards is to women specifically that are navigating all the multiple and often confusing stages of menopause. So, number one, just thank you so much for being here, Nina.
Hi, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So great. This is, we were connected a while back through a mutual friend and, have had some different conversations. And so I'm so grateful now that we're able to put it into this platform and to share all your awesome knowledge and all that you're doing in the world to our listeners and to be able to get out of you all that amazing information that you've been able to gather in sleep and how it gets impacted in this stage of life for women. So to begin, which is...
Molly, remind me, how old are you? I can't remember.
I am about to be 35. My birthday is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, a couple days away.
Nice. That's
yes.
A perfect age. Okay, good. Just for
context. Yes, absolutely. No, that's a really great question. I think that could lead us in to even just creating the context for us of, so, this episode specifically geared to women. Of course, we're open to any men that want to participate and listen in. And, I'm committed that we really help further educate how the breadth of this area, because I know when I read your book, I was even surprised to hear of all the multiple stages I wasn't cued into, that when this begins, I think even can be earlier than people realize. So if you could just begin to start at the beginning on what this looks like.
Sure.
Yes.
So when I was about a month or so after I turned 46, I had always been a really lifelong terrific sleeper through 4 kids, through all sorts of work ups and downs. My sleep was never an issue. And suddenly around a month after I turned 46, I started having this thing where I would wake up at like 4 a.m, bolt awake, not anxious, just wide awake. And I would be awake, kind of looking at the ceiling and wondering why the fuck I was awake. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to curse on here.
You totally are, yes.
And I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep till around 6, and then I would drift off, and then, of course, have to wake up for my day. And it was really, really unsettling. And I started Googling it, and I went to visit my doctor, and I realized that I was having a bunch of other symptoms. My periods had become irregular. I was getting a little bit depressed. I was having various symptoms that I realized ultimately were perimenopause, which is the period in a woman's life leading into menopause. And it can be anywhere really from like 2 to 11 years. It's a long period. And for most women, average age of menopause is around somewhere between 50 and 52. So for most women in their 40s, they'll be in perimenopause at some point. It can start earlier. It can start in your late 30s or your early 40s, but it's typical to start in kind of your mid 40s. And there are a lot of symptoms that come with perimenopause. You're fat, you start gaining weight, you start sleeping less well is really probably the number one thing. Sorry, I'm pausing for a sec. I'm blanking on all the myriad symptoms of perimenopause.
Yeah, there's so many.
There are really so many. There are actually, the reason I started this community, the Woolfer, is that there are 33 documented symptoms of perimenopause. One of them is impending sense of doom, which I thought was really very funny.
It is.
Your breath can change. Your teeth can start to shift. I mean, there are a lot of things that happen. You start to develop back fat. You start to have more hair growth on your face. I mean, there are all sorts of things that happen. You have vaginal dryness. But probably one of the most common symptoms is insomnia.
Yes.
And it can come later in my menopausal journey. I was only in perimenopause in the end for about 2-3 years. I got my last period when I was 48. And once you haven't had a period for a year, you're considered fully in menopause. I'm now 50, so I'm a year into menopause. But your sleep issues don't go away with perimenopause or menopause. They just seem to change. Although I suppose for some people they may go away. In my case, they came and went, and then I ended up having really terrible hot flashes in the last 6 months, which again, for some women can happen during perimenopause. For a lot of women, it happens after your period stops, like for me. And the hot flashes were so debilitating that I ended up going on hormones. So essentially, I was suffering from lack of sleep, realized I was in perimenopause, decided that I wanted to create a community of women to talk about it, to kind of talk about aging in all the kind of good, bad, and in between, the ways we start to feel nostalgic and we worry that we're irrelevant and, our kids are growing up and maybe our careers are stalled. I mean, there are all sorts of things that come with middle age that are challenging. And then there are all these great things that come with it, kind of our increased, wisdom and knowing our bodies and knowing more what we need and want physically. And, there are a lot of good things that come with aging. But I basically wanted to create a space where women could be super honest about it and get advice from other women and get information. So we have a lot of conversation in our community about sleep.
Yes.
At least once a month, we'll get a woman who posts at 4 a.m. and says, I'm awake at 4 a.m. and I can't sleep and I'm just reading posts. Is anyone else awake? And, if I'm lucky enough to sleep that night, I'll wake up the next morning at, 9, and I'll see a very active thread that went on at 4 a.m. of women talking about all the things they do when they can't sleep.
So that's so important because, number one, the difference that you've made in this area is vast. Not only did you, write this really acclaimed book, What Would Virginia Woolf Do? But you also created this group that it's so tight knit. It's, gotten tons of press about the interactions there and the difference that it's made. So share a little bit about how this, as you said, you found that you needed to create this community and through this topic of sleep, this has been something that started from the beginning, and this was part of your thought process around it. Were there certain things that you were able to learn through your kind of open documentation of what your trials and tribulations around sleep? Like, so what are some of the things that you've found, through having this community that have made a difference in your own sleep habits?
Sure. And I should say, just to explain to our audience, we initially started the community on Facebook. We were called What Would Virginia Woolf Do? Which is a little bit of a dark joke.
Yes.
My girlfriends are a lot of smart feminists and big readers. And the original title of the group was kind of like a, should we throw in the towel kind of nod to Virginia Woolf, who sadly killed herself in her 50s. It was not meant to mock suicide. It was a name for something that I had no idea would become as big as it has.
Yes.
So it grew on Facebook to like 32,000 women. And then last fall, in the fall of 2019, we left Facebook. We built our own app, new social platform, and we've gone to a subscription model. So we have this, and we're now called the Woolfer, which is what the women in the community started calling themselves organically. So Woolfer was 2 O's for Virginia Woolf. So now we're in a subscription platform where we're a website and a newsletter, and women go on and pay $35 a year to be part of the community and get advice. So I'd say, a lot of the things I'm sure your listeners know. We've done long lists in our newsletter about what, best ways to cure insomnia. So there are all sorts of natural teas, right? Like valerian, melatonin and magnesium were the 2 things I did in the beginning that really made a big difference. We're pretty big fans, I'd say, of magnesium in our community.
Yeah.
Although there are a lot of different kinds of magnesium, and you do need to make sure you're taking the right one, and you should consult with your doctor about it. I actually had like a magnesium mishap at one point where I started taking a lot of it. It also helps you be regular. It helps you go to the bathroom regularly, and it helps you sleep well. And I kind of, I don't know, it was a little stupid of me. I kind of thought it was like a wonder drug, and I started taking 3 or 4 pills a day. And I have to say, one of my doctors mistakenly said to me, oh, it can't hurt you. You'll just poop it out if you take too much. But it's not true. I ended up slowing down my heart. I started having weird cardiac symptoms, and they thought I had a heart issue, and I had to go to all these specialists and have all these tests. And then it became clear that I was actually ODing on magnesium.
So great call out, by the way. Thank you for saying that because it can occur as this wonder drug. And oh my God, this is game changer. And what is good in one dose might be even better in a bigger and a larger dose. So thank you for kind of calling out the importance of monitoring that.
Yeah, I know
Really
that's really
important.
what I thought. And I do
Yeah.
still take magnesium and I
Of
really
course.
love it.
Yep.
I do think it has been kind of a wonder drug for me, but you do need
Sure.
the right amount and the right kind. So some people also take melatonin, which I found in the beginning of my sleep crisis maybe helped, but it didn't seem to do all that much. Doing the whole usual no screens in bed and darkening
Yes.
the room. My room is pitch black all the time. Sex in the middle of the night often helps. Masturbation
Yes.
helps if you can't go to sleep. That's kind of a plus.
Great.
Don't drink too much water before bed because another thing that happens as you get older is you have to get up to pee in the middle of the night. And so that wakes you up. And that's something that I never used to have. And now I do. I probably get up at least twice a night, which isn't much. My, people who are older complain about this a lot. The need to pee in the night. What I ended up doing was going on hormone replacement therapy, which is, as I'm sure you probably know, although you're only 35, maybe not, it's very controversial. It used
Yes.
to be kind of the standard, and then it became kind of demonized as something that was going to give us all cancer and heart failure. And now it's become a little bit more in vogue again under a doctor's care for a certain number of years at a certain time along the way. People are thinking that HRT might be protective for a lot of things, including Alzheimer's. And I mean, basically, my feeling about it was I didn't want to go. My mother died of breast cancer young, and when she was 46. So I did not want to go on hormones. But I reached a point last winter when I was 49, so kind of a year into menopause, where I was having up to 30 hot flashes a day, and most
Oh,
of them at
wow.
night. So I was waking up all night long and really waking up just drenched, waking up
Yeah.
where like, I would go and take a shower at 3 in the morning and then at 5 in the morning. And it was really brutal. And I finally reached a point where I thought lack of sleep and interrupted sleep is as unhealthy for me as any number of things. I need to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And so I'm on 0.025 estradiol patch and I
Hmm.
take 100 milligrams a night of progesterone. And I sleep like an absolute baby now. And it's been such a gift after
Mm.
I kind of went through like, in the beginning at 46, I had some sleepless, I would have that waking up thing, but that wasn't nearly as bad as at 49 when I was having these hot flashes all night long. Like I would push my partner away from me. I mean, it was just really disruptive. So now I'd say it's been about 5 or 6 months since I've been on hormones and I just sleep so well. It's like heaven on earth.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that too, because to your point, there's people have different opinions about these things. And they, as you call out too, it kind of in different, the popularity can go up and down and the demonization of certain approaches.
Yeah, no,
So
the hormone thing is hard. I mean,
yeah,
you feel self-conscious taking them a little. You do feel like you have to kind of explain why you're doing it. And there are women
yep,
who absolutely love them and women who won't take them at all. And as I said, the medical opinion about them is shifting. It
yeah,
seems like always shifting. So it's really, and also it's very confusing. If you start to scratch the surface, you'll meet women who rub gels on their arms and women who ingest pills and women who wear patches. There are a lot of different ways and a lot of different drugs. So it's very confusing about the right thing to do. And what I would urge your menopausal listeners to do is really the best thing to do is find someone who specializes in menopause because most OBGYNs and certainly primary care doctors really don't. They'll like offer to put you on birth control pills or they'll give you sleeping pills. When I first went in with the complaints of sleep, I was offered trazodone and
oh,
Ambien
yeah,
and I didn't want to take sleeping pills. I really wanted to get to the more systemic issues. So again, this is something, if you go into our community at thewoolfer.com and you search for sleep, you'll get so many stories and information about the myriad things women do. But I think those are the main things. I mean, we get, obviously, I'm sure you have this too, people debating, is it better to just get up and organize
right.
full albums, read a book, watch Netflix, or is it better to just lay there? I think that's kind of personal preference.
Right.
Meditation, certainly the meditating apps like Calm can be very helpful.
Well, I also love what this kind of experimentation approach but also community approach to navigating all of this, because as you kind of touched on, it can be so confusing. It can take trial and error. What can work for one woman might not work for another woman. And I certainly, and from my own personal experience, as you know, for me, when I went through my period of insomnia, for me, this is where the whole company came from, was just, knowing how much of an impact that time of my life made on me. And for me, it felt very lonely. I felt like I didn't have anywhere to go. The steps to take that would be from that systemic approach that you pointed to, I didn't know a resource or forum to be a part of. And for you to have created exactly that, specifically tailored to women, really 40 and over that are dealing with these problems, it's so important, because that sense of partnership in all of this is invaluable.
Yeah, no, it really is. The one thing women tell me all the time when I meet them in person is that the community makes them feel less alone and it makes them feel normal. I think for women entering into it, it can be a little daunting. I did another podcast with someone the other day who said she had just joined the Woolfer community. And she said, I feel like I'm in a stadium, with thousands of women I don't know. But once you start talking and sharing, we really have created a wonderful kind of tone, and there's a sense of inclusion and welcomeness that's also not saccharine. So you'll get honest answers, but there is a lot of support and a lot of humor and a lot of great resource. So it's a really good place. We're starting to think about it as like, now that we've moved off Facebook, I find that I use the app in a much more intentional way. It really feels like you have like a girlfriend in your pocket. Like you go there when you want advice, when you have a question to ask, when you're looking to see what everyone's reading and talking about, sometimes we'll have a big thread for like the Oscars. That'll be kind of a funny thread. People are watching the Oscars and kind of live commenting. So it really is it's a very special place that I kind of unexpectedly fell into.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So cool. And so for these women, just a couple of questions. If you could kind of underscore again, I know you touched on this when we first started, but what are the kind of the age brackets? Like, what is the earliest that women might, if they're in this period of, am I just stressed out and not sleeping? What's the earliest time period where they could start to ascertain, am I going through this? And then what is, for your group, is there an aged out period where we're not dealing with some of these, things? Like, what do you almost hone in on?
So I'd say, there are medical exceptions, right? There are women who go through surgical menopause, who have hysterectomies or have their ovaries removed for medical reasons when they're in their 20s or 30s. And there are women who just go through unexplained early menopause. I have a friend who went through menopause in her mid 30s, but overwhelming.
Oh dear, great. Right before my birthday. Amazing.
No, that's not going to happen to you. Overwhelmingly typical is that in your mid to late 40s, your period starts to not show up every month. It starts to stagger a little, and you start to get a few other symptoms. You'll start to feel this impending sense of doom. You'll start to be sleepless. You'll start to notice your teeth are shifting. Like you start to notice weight gain that's kind of unexplained. And that is the beginning of perimenopause. And again, if you Google it, you'll see there are many, many symptoms, most of which I ended up having. There's the rare woman who doesn't get any, and there are women who have like no symptoms. They have no hot flashes. They just one day stop getting their period and they're done. But that's really rare. So kind of mid to late 40s is typically when it starts. And then, if you're lucky, you're done by your mid 50s. And then things calm down, although I'm not there yet, right? I'm only 50. And I hear from women in my community that a lot of symptoms continue, unfortunately. Sleeplessness. I think sleeplessness, while it's a symptom of menopause, it's also a symptom of age.
Yeah.
And so men also suffer from sleep issues. I don't think anyone sleeps as well as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
I won't stay on these hormones forever, and I don't know what will happen to me then. I am really sleeping well now.
Okay. So this is so great though, because what you're providing for people is one, this experience that it's not just a one and done. You've been in this conversation now for years. How many years ago did you say you guys created this?
It'll be 5 years in October. And it is really interesting the way, like, my perspective on it changes, right? When I started it, I was 46. In a few months, I'll be 51.
Sure.
And I'm sure in 5 more years, the issues I'll bring to it and the issues I'll be interested in reading about will have shifted yet again. My kids are getting older, but we really are a space. I'd say the average age in our community is 52 to 54, but we very much have women in their early 40s. The rule is you have to be 40 to join the community. And
Yeah.
we have a handful of women in their 80s, definitely women in their 70s. But for the most part, the bulk is between 40 and 60.
No, this is so great because I mean, many of my clients that I work with are often 60 and over because what they've found is that not only did they go through exactly all the things that you just spelled out of the difficulties around their sleep, but also it seemed to have created this vicious cycle of just a connection or maybe disconnection to sleep working for them and then some maladaptive habits around that and how to cope. And then it's, of course, paired with aging and some of the things that we see with melatonin rates and some of the things that happen as we do get older. So all of these things, both on a physiological and psychological perspective, and then even some environmental issues
Yeah.
that culminate, right? And so then it's just many years and then you must get resigned to, oh, well, I don't really sleep anymore. I barely squeeze it out.
That's right. I mean, bladder issues alone, if you're constantly
Yes.
waking up in the middle of the night, and that's a
Yeah.
huge thing that happens as we get older. So, yeah, there are a lot of obstacles for sure.
But what I'm left with too is like I'm left with this experience of that you are actively, modeling this testing mentality, this kind of quantified self of, okay, so I'm trying this and this worked, this didn't work. Let me share about it. Here's what I'm testing out right now and I'm getting good results. And then also learning from the community. So it's a dynamic process.
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, that reminds me of a really funny story. A few months ago, before I went on the hormones, I read about something called the bed jet. Have you heard about the bed jet?
I used to have the bed jet actually. Now I have the chili pad, but yes, I used to have the bed jet.
I actually love the bed jet. So I called them up,
Yes.
asked them if they would send me one. They did so that I could review it. It's like an air conditioner for your bed.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I set it up and I really loved it. And now I don't need it at the moment because I've gone on hormones, but I was a big fan. And I think a few women in our community bought it. It's a very funny little gizmo. So yeah, I mean,
Yes.
not only do you have to try, and is there a lot of trial and error for sleep issues? There's a lot of trial and error for menopausal issues in general. I mean, when I first realized I was going through perimenopause, I went to the health food store and probably bought, $500 worth of supplements, most of which, except for magnesium, I don't take anymore.
Yeah.
But, you try
Similar.
everything because various things work for different people and, desperate times cause for desperate measures.
Yeah. But also, just this kind of brand value of laughing throughout all of it. Because that is something that I often find is a missing when people are coming to me that don't have a community that fosters that. And instead, there's not a lot of play in this area or experimentation. And there's simply just like either resignation or
No, I
frustration,
think, yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think you're so right. I mean, a big part of our kind of philosophy is no shame. The idea that we can celebrate that there are things that about getting older that are really hard and sucky, and there are things that are great, and it is what it is. And we want to be able to talk about it honestly and laugh about it and come up with solutions and not feel kind of hidden away in a corner like we're supposed to be ashamed because we're women getting older in our society, which is absurd, of course. But there is
Yes.
a lot of shame. So we're definitely here to combat that.
Well, I'm so glad you said that word too, because I've had, so I have an interesting split of a clientele. So both have a lot of menopausal and postmenopausal women that I work with, but then I also have a whole slew of poker players. So imagine the disconnect between these two groups. But when I will talk to, my poker players and because, they're trying to optimize their sleep to make a difference at their results at the poker table at odd hours of the night. So when I'll talk to them about this concept of shame around sleep, it doesn't always land in the same way. Shame around, and I know, of course, you're speaking to shame as well as, as it relates to all the changes that happen through this process. But, this idea also of just the shame with sleep specifically, it doesn't, people that aren't in the midst of it and really struggling, they don't always get that word and how that
Right.
can relate. And it really can be so shameful. And just, oftentimes people just stop sharing what's been going on because, and now they're trying things and they've maybe given up. And so now they're bringing their phone into bed. They're barely sleeping, they're just
Right, well,
surviving.
I mean, failure in whatever way we interpret it is, can feel embarrassing. So if
Yeah.
you're not sleeping well, if you're not functioning well, if you don't feel like you're looking your best, if you're depressed or anxious, I mean, all these things can make us feel bad about ourselves. And, our idea is it's normal, it's natural, it's part of life. Like, how do we manage it better and, move on and not feel bad about ourselves.
So it's so great that you are creating this kind of openness. So with that, I know we were speaking, briefly before we started recording, and I was laughing because I love your openness too around this idea. And I've been kind of writing about it more recently, this whole idea of adding a new step into our bedtime rituals and around sexual wellness. So as it relates particularly for women that might be single, and how we can bring in all this new sex tech to calm ourselves in the evening, when oftentimes if our hormones are out of whack, sometimes we're doing the exact opposite in our on a physiological state,
Mhm.
where cortisol levels are rising in the evening, and certainly
Yeah.
not melatonin, our ability to produce our own natural state of a surplus of melatonin is not always there in the same way, and we're actually stressing before bed. So these other new ways of kind of regaining control in that area are really interesting. And I love that it sounds like your platform is really open about the experimentation process of that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we get a lot of women I think if our community has done two things particularly helpful for women, I think it's talking about vaginal atrophy, vaginal dryness,
Mm.
something that happens in menopause that a lot of people don't want to talk about with their doctors or with anyone. I didn't even know it existed until I learned about it in the group.
Yeah.
I was not suffering from it and I had no idea it even existed till I was 47, and it's a real thing. And also just sex, women being able to talk about sex and their needs and their desires and their fantasies and their habits. We're very open about it in the community, and we're big proponents of masturbation and vibrators and sex toys, and we write about them frequently. And we've done some pieces on sex tech, which is actually a term now, which I love.
Yes. I know. Me too. It's great.
And yeah, I mean, so a lot of women, I mean, I didn't even have a vibrator till I turned 40. So there are a lot of women who don't start thinking about these things until later in life. And I hope one of the things our community does is give them permission to explore. And it is certainly something that can help with sleeplessness. And, whether you have a partner or not, there's masturbation, there's waking up your partner in the middle of the night for play of all kinds. Having an orgasm does relax you and helps you get back to sleep.
Yeah, when we were talking before, I was sharing how I had the opportunity at CES, this large tech event, of meeting with a lot of different, mainly female founders of these sex tech companies, and kind of rebranding this whole area and making it a really an opportunity for female empowerment to pick up some of these different items. And then I love the word that you used of explore, by bringing about this exploration into this area that many people, depending on their relationship to this topic, might have not really had that opportunity to do. And then some of these tech companies have been doing some interesting research around the connection between those levels of cortisol as it relates to the kind of release feel good hormones that we get out of the process of climax and orgasm. So the fact that you are bringing in this platform is exciting to, test and find out what works, what doesn't work, and how to bring this in. Is this something too that you find that many people throughout, in particular, dealing with hot flashes and what have you, can use as yet another thing to kind of calm themselves and bring back sleep?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, women, we talk about it all the time in our
Yeah.
community. Definitely. I think the only thing that holds people back is kind of shame or embarrassment
Yeah.
or lack of knowledge. And so we try and normalize it and help women feel more comfortable with exploring these things.
Yeah, so great. And, also as it relates to, the hot flashes and, what women are navigating there in that area, it's so crazy from the exploration. There's so many elements, there's so many sleep tech items that you can bring in to make a difference around even just that physiological response. And the fact that, testing out things like that with the sex tech or the cooling, parameters, whether it's bed jet, chili pad, any of these things, it does take some kind of trusted sources, because you can also spend a pretty penny going down all these different avenues if you don't have.
Yeah, you definitely can. And it is hard. I mean, in the beginning of the community, I used to always kind of say, like, I just want an answer. I don't want to keep trying all these.
Yes.
Because you spend a lot of money on supplements and gadgets. And I mean, that bed jet, I got for free to write about for my website. I mean, that thing is like $450, I think. It's a huge expense. So
Yeah.
It is a problem. And I'm sad to say there is not really an answer. You find with menopause, you hopefully find a menopause expert and they really listen to your symptoms and to your concerns. But you're still going to end up, there is some trial and error. Not to mention with menopause, it's a constantly shifting landscape. So my symptoms are different at 50 than they were at 49 than they were at 48. And it keeps evolving. So yeah, it's hard and it's not great with our, screwed up healthcare system. It's not easy to get good healthcare. There's now a movement of telemedicine for menopause. And there are 3 companies I know of that are all kind of launching telemed products. One's called The Cusp, one is called Electra Health, and one is called Geneve. And I think menopause is uniquely well suited to telemedicine, actually, because what you really need is you don't need to go see someone. You really need to talk to someone about your symptoms. You can always get blood tests that are sent in, but it's not really so much that you need a physical exam. So I'm hoping that because we hear of a lot of women in our community who are live in remote places. Like if you live in North Dakota, there's not likely to be a menopause specialist anywhere near you. It's hard to find one in New York.
Yeah, that's so true. So the access element is really important. So kind of bridging that gap. I love that call out because there's a lot of frustrating things about all the differences in our modern society as it relates to things that could negatively impact our sleep and our health. But then to your point, there's a lot of amazing things that are happening that can make a difference and that we can benefit from. Wow. Well, thank you. I feel like we could talk, so we could really go deep and just, the fact that you have taken out the time from your busy schedule to help educate our audience and your audience to further underscore the difference that, just creating an open dialogue and communication can make in this area. This is not a brief period of a woman's life. This is something that, you want to settle in for and create, create some, partnership and an alliance with and, trusted group. So I wholeheartedly recommend your platform. And I often refer different women to be able to have, to join your community because I think it is so important and it's a big part of this and how to feel empowered during this phase in our lives. So thank you.
Thank you. No, absolutely. And absolutely. Any woman out there over 40, please come join us and check us out. There's a free 3-day trial. It's www.thewoolfer.com, WOOLFER. And I'm very accessible. You can always just email me, Nina@thewoolfer. And it's a group of really kind of smart, interesting women. And we'd love to have new voices.
Oh, so great. And in addition, certainly take her up on that offer and, check that out and peruse that and get right in too. If you do the 3-day trial, ask some questions, get on the court, see, all that comes out of that. And then also you have, and you're a tremendous writer, and you have your book, you've a whole collection of things that people can read and learn more about you as well. So great. Well, thank you again. And looking forward, probably have to have a part 2 when things change within another couple of years and you've learned a whole other series of things for us to share.
It's really nice talking to you, Molly.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Sleep is a Skill podcast, the #1 podcast for people who want to take their sleep skills to the next level. Every Monday, I send out something that I call Molly's Monday Obsessions, containing everything that I'm obsessing over in the world of sleep. Head on over to sleepisaskill.com to sign up.